day. Oops. We would be lucky any day to hear from today's speaker. But given that she is from Indian descent, there's an even more synchronicity between our mission here at Anti-Racist Conversations and her work. Jyoti Parmar, say it right? Good. Comes to us today from Gainesville, Florida, where she lives with her husband, kiddo, and their cats. And as a point of personal privilege, as an animal lover, I love that your cats made it onto your bio, Jyoti. Jyoti grew up in India, where her activism began at the young age of 11, when she protested the different treatment of boys and girls in both athletics and recreation. When Jyoti was 16 years old, she immigrated to the US. And her experiences growing up in India and then as an immigrant informs her race, class, and power across boundaries. Jyoti gained extensive corporate business and management experience in the retail world, which she used to start and build 2 successful social justice organizations, both of which align perfectly with our work here. As the executive director of North Central Florida Indivisible, Jyoti oversees its 3 branches, including the Democracy Team, the Anti-Hate Team, and the Wellness Team. And these teams work in coalitions across 4 counties to bring an inclusive, participatory, just, and robust democracy and culture of acceptance, belonging, and mutual liberation. Amen. But that's not it. She also acts as the clean energy organizing representative for the Sierra Club of Florida. And in this work, she focuses on utilities, energy, and environmental justice, as well as community organizing. So all of this to say, with great humility, it is my sincere honor to welcome Jyoti Parmar.
Thank you all so much for having me here. I will say, wow, I am impressed by my bio. You presented that so well. Yes, my name is Jyoti Parmar, and my pronouns are she, they, and I am in Gainesville, which is the land of the Timucua people, who are part of the Seminole tribe, but they are actually a subsection of the tribe that is now considered extinct. I like to talk about where I am, because where I stand today, where all of us live, we live on land that is not ours, that was taken from people who were here before us. And it was built by people whose labor was taken and their freedom was taken from them. And their homes and their cultures and their histories were stolen from them. And they were removed, separated from their families, and it was done repeatedly for over centuries, in fact. So when I'm here to talk about AAPI and Heritage Month, before I can even start there, I have to recognize that the need for this month is actually based, as someone else already said today, is part of our history. It is the creation history of the modern state of the United States of America and today's world. And it is based on stolen land and stolen people, stolen labor, and lost histories. And it is not just in the past, it is also in the past, it is also today. And we hope to do better and not have it continue in the future. And with that in mind is why when we started creating our Indivisible group here with the idea of building a robust democracy, well, we realized that if we continue with some of the structures that are already in existence, we are going to continue some of the harms that have already been done. You cannot build straight pillars the way you've already built them if you're building them on uneven ground. So we started with the anti-hate team and the wellness team, because anti-hate work requires a lot of self-care and mutual care A lot of healing has to happen, because these conversations, I love that this group focuses on facts. We do not focus on facts, because facts and history is what has been written. And as we all know, the writing is not done by those who are being oppressed, or whose land or labor or history or language is being stolen. So we actually do not focus on facts. We focus, obviously, we honor and share what is known, but we also attend to what has not been spoken, what has not been said, what has been lost, what happened in between these two things that we do not know about. And I will say this, today, yesterday, this whole week, I have, in the best possible way, I have been regretting agreeing to do today's meeting, because I had to study. I had to study to learn Asian American history. And it's very telling that I don't know, as an Asian person, as an Indian person, as an activist who does this kind of work, I don't know Asian American history. It is not taught in our schools. It is, even when it is taught, it is just an add-on at the end. And because it is so vast, because there is no Asian identity, there's no Asian American identity, it is still in the formation period that our history books, our schools, they teach American history, they teach some Indigenous history, they teach some African history. That is also because, at least in Florida, they're required by law to teach some. And then they kind of, by the time they've gone through all of that, they're getting to March or April, and it's time for our standardized tests, even the school continues to the end of May. So then these teachers have to make a decision. What are they going to teach next? They have to start preparing the students to take these tests. And then they're going to choose between Indian history, Indian American, like from Asia, Indian American history, or Chinese American history, because those are the two largest groups of Asians in the United States. And so very often it depends on who's in the classroom. If we have a couple of East Asian children in the classroom, it's going to be, what's going to get taught is Chinese history, and it will take a couple of days, and then they will do maybe a luncheon about Indian history, have Indian Culture Day, and everybody bring their food and, have like a half day off kind of situation. So our Asian children, next generation, do not know Asian American history. And unlike their parents, which is us, they also do not know Asian history from their place of origin, from their parents' place of origin. I grew up in India. I was made to study Indian history. I know Indian history, so I have foundational grounds to stand on. So there was this very interesting research done by the Pew research group, and I'll see if I can pull some up. I do not have a presentation that I made for you. I just made an outline for myself to talk about some things. And some of the things that I found in the process of, here we go. That only 20% of Asians in America say that they know Asian American history, or that they know it well. 20%. Really troubling that we do not know our history. We do not know our history because we don't exist as a people. Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, it's obviously not one people. Let's see, Asia is the largest of the world's continents. It constitutes constitutes nearly a third of the Earth's landmass. And it has, gosh, I don't even know how many countries. I know that the larger, what is traditional Asia is like well over 30 countries. And to take all of those identities and say this is one identity is itself an injustice, and it is a means, it is a continuation of how Asian Americans are not able to get representation because all of our data gets aggregated into this one large mass. And so the success of Indian Americans or Chinese Americans completely marginalizes the needs of Vietnamese Americans or Hmong people. And, you know, disaggregation of the data is the greatest need that Asian Americans have today. The other thing about it is that so many of these identities we don't relate to each other. Only 6% of all Asians said that they identify with other Asians. 6%. It's really people identify within their own ethnic communities. When asked to talk about what their identities are, they don't say they're Asian Americans. They say they are Indian Americans, or they are Indian, or they are from Borneo, wherever they're from, the specific regional, even within the countries that we're from, we don't necessarily identify. Like Indians will, when they're talking to each other, we're not saying we're Indian Americans. We're saying we're Punjabi or Tamil or Bengali. So that data is missing, and that history doesn't apply to all of us, and we don't relate to it. So this idea of an Asian American heritage is absurd. It is non-existent. It is non-existent, yes. Especially when you think about, for example, this year I was reading, and there's a theme to the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And the theme is something about advancing leadership. So I went into the document, the press release, and they're talking about, there is an organization in DC, which is composed of people who work in government in DC, who are of these various place of origin and ethnic identities, and an organization in that area, and a federal government agency that are advancing this fabulous sounding, seemingly very organized, representative theme for Asian American Heritage Month. None of the people I called to talk about this had ever heard of any of them. Who are these people in DC who claim to be representing us and who are leading this, who are creating themes for our Heritage Month? I certainly don't know them. Nobody in Gainesville knows them. Nobody in Gainesville has heard of them. We saw it at the same time you saw it. When you Googled it on the news, or you heard the press conference that Mr. Biden was giving, and you might have heard about it. We heard about it at the same time. So what is Asian American Heritage Month? What is Asian American Heritage? That was a lot. It's been a little bit traumatizing, I will tell you, learning about Asian American heritage, especially this awareness, that when we have events, like when you think about African American history, local communities are leading them, but this Asian History Heritage Month, a group from DC is leading it. What is this? There are also, the API group, AAHPI group that started the anti-hate movement from 2019 on the Pacific Coast. They're a significant drivers of the conversation, but they're much more grassroots. They do, in fact, represent a lot of the communities that they're talking about. They're actually doing the data gathering and aggregating and disaggregating it so that we can see ourselves in that data. This other thing, I have nothing to say about it, unfortunately. Let's see. You will probably know as much about Asian American history as I will. My point that I'd like to make is that our history in the United States actually started long before the United States was formed. The reason Indigenous American people are called Indian is because Christopher Columbus was out looking for India, which back then, India was one of the richest, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, producing 30% of the world's GDP. So they wanted to come out there, do business, gather our resources, coming out as adventurers and as immigrants, as many of us today are, going the other direction. But that is how they found themselves in the newfound land. That is why Native Americans are called Indians. That is not their name. Their names have been lost in the process. So they were impacted by Asianness before Asians ever landed on this land. Okay, I've given my lectures. So when we're talking about Asian American history or Asian, Native Hawaiian, it almost feels like we're talking about, we're talking about immigrant history, but Native Hawaiians are not immigrants. They are from Hawaii. These are people that we invaded, that we conquered, and their experience and their identity and their connection with the mainland and with the United States and the US government is very different than any of the other identities and ethnicities that we talk about when we talk about Asian. Within Asian groups, there is straight up racism. There is hostility and competition, but there's straight up racism. Koreans and Japanese don't like each other necessarily. I am clearly speaking in generalities here. There've been conquests and oppressions within Asian communities, and there are communities that will not interact with other communities. So which heritage are we supposed to celebrate? Okay, I'm gonna stop, and if it's okay, I'm gonna open it up to any questions. I will say a couple of little things. Asians could not become citizens until the late 1940s, early 1950s. 1940s and 1950s, in my mother's lifetime, only 20 years before I was born, we could not become US citizens. The birthright citizenship that we take so much for granted and that has been under attack lately, that became encoded in US law because of an Asian American, and I believe it was a Chinese person who was born in the US, and he had gone to China, and upon his return as a young adult, he was only there for a visit, it's not that he was gone for years and years. Upon his return to the US, he was not allowed in because the Chinese Exclusion Act had passed. And he was not allowed in, and he had to prove that he was born here and claim his birthright as an American born. And that's what encoded birthright to Americans, birthright citizenship to Americans. So at the time, Chinese people immigrating to the US could not become citizens. If you were born here, you were then granted citizenship. Let's see, the grape, have you all heard about the Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers that became, that organization was obviously, I mean, it's a whole other level, but there was a Filipino American, I want to say Larry Alito, I will look up the name for you, who was organizing farm workers in California and not making headway. And he got in touch with Cesar Chavez. The two unions united, and they led that massive great boycott that changed US labor history. And that's another thing that I know about. Very few things here and there. My own memory, I will say, I moved here in 1981 to New Jersey. And part of why this reading, studying this history this week has been traumatizing a little bit. Gosh, I'll have to look up his name. As I think about it, I can't remember his name. There was a gentleman, Vincent Chin, in 1982. I was here. I was young and new to the country, and I watched this play out on the news. Vincent Chin in Detroit was beaten to death for being Asian, or looking like he might be Japanese, because back then there was that oil crisis and the car industry, the motor the entire industry was very much under some turbulence and undergoing economic upheaval. And there were people who thought that it was Japan's fault. So these two white men, trying to remember who it was it two or four? It's just a small number of men beat him up, but they beat him so bad, they beat him to death. He was out drinking with his friends for his bachelor party the night before his wedding, and they killed him. And on the news, the conversations were about how they were not the kind of men who would have just done something terrible to an innocent person. And they were not the kind of men who should go to jail, who should be punished for this, and how their rage was understandable. And they did not go to jail. They had nothing happen to them. They did not even dispute. There was no dispute here. They beat him up. There were witnesses. There was no dispute. But there was no finding of a guilty verdict. And this is, again, going back to the very vast set of people who are considered Asian, or who are locked in on this 1 month of May to celebrate our heritage. At that time in New Jersey, there was a group called Dot Busters. The dot was referring to the bindi that Hindu women wear. Actually, just Indian women, but it is a traditional Hindu practice. They call themselves the Dot Busters. And that year in Old Bridge, there was a man who was attacked with baseball bats and put in a coma. And there was another man who was attacked in Hoboken who was killed within those 2 years, but that never made it to the news. And we knew that in the local news that they were attacked for being foreigners, for being Asian, for not being white. I myself my family, we were new to the country, and we had to deal with a lot of stuff that I have not talked about because it was that traumatic. And when you come to a new country and you hear about people like you being killed, like being beaten to death, you try to keep your head down and pass. You try to be as American as you can. We changed our accents, we changed how we dressed, we changed the food we ate in public. Like we did not take in food to school for lunch. And this pews, I will share the link with you later. The research shows that even today, this is 40 years later, 30% of all Asians say openly that they hide parts of their culture or their ethnicity from others. We hide our differentness from others because it is not safe to be ourselves in America. In Florida, just last year, the legislation passed prohibiting not Chinese citizens, people of Chinese origin, from purchasing property. There are some rules about where they can or cannot purchase property, but home ownership and business ownership is severely restricted, not just for if you're a Chinese citizen, but if you're Chinese. We already know that, and I don't know if it's nationwide. I know that in Florida, people of Asian origin, but in particular Chinese origin, are not able to get faculty jobs as easily as they could before because they are not allowed to they have to prove that they're not connected to the Chinese government in any way. So if they have relationships and if you are from another country or you have an ethnic connection to another country, you would have to go through your circle of friends to make sure that none of them have any grants that they are working on that is connected to the Chinese government. So many of them are not able to apply for jobs in Florida. Those are facts. I don't know if they're going to make it into a history book. I don't know if New York Times is going to publish them. So as much as I do really appreciate, because these conversations can be very difficult. So focusing on facts is one very good way to lower the temperature. But we have to think about what's missing as well. Thank you. I think I've talked myself out. I'm happy to talk about anything else if you would like to. I've talked about my heritage by talking about not my heritage.
Well, I just appreciate, wow, your stories is just amazing. Your experience has just been, it's mind-boggling for me. And yet it also resonates with me because being an African-American, I hear a lot of what you said in my own story. Just the killings. And I don't know any other way to say it. I can't make it sound pretty, because I'm originally from Texas, and I grew up seeing a lot of this, walking with my head down. Don't make eye contact because that could be conceived as disrespect. And so I certainly resonate with that. And it pains me to hear the facts. We want the facts, but the facts are very painful. And I just, I applaud your boldness today to share your information. And I think that's what it's going to take, just through a lot of pain, maybe tears sometimes, because I'm a crybaby, just sharing that because it almost feels like a freedom. It's out of my system now. I actually talked about it. Yeah, I feel better. But what about the next person who they've not had the opportunity to share their story? And it's like a big, I can't even describe how they must feel. So I just truly appreciate you being here. I know you struggle, as you said at the beginning, of whether or not to present, but I am so very glad that you did. You're over the hurdle now. And I would love to hear more of your story later, maybe in another meeting, because I think it's vital that we share, not just a 2-minute snippet of some struggle we've been through, but long term, let's get that information out there, because, and another word you said too, the marginalized, and I think that's a word that does not come from our culture, but I think it's a word that's been imposed upon us to really think about, hang on to, and keep us in bondage. I've stopped using that word because marginalized to me signifies a lack of power. And I don't think there's anyone in your culture or mine that's not powerful, but we have to, it's almost like we have to rethink, um, get rid of that word and start communicating that we are powerful. I grew up seeing power. Also grew up seeing people that were afraid to speak out, but dared not to remain silent. That we had to speak out. So marginalized is not who we are. It's what we've been taught to think we are. That's my comment. But thank you so much.
No, I agree with you. Thank you for that. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves that this language that we use is also not necessarily of our creation, and who does it serve, and whose perspective is reflected in it. I did not move to the US from a position of weakness. We moved here to compete because we believed in because we've had success. We wanted to take on the world. We wanted to see where we could go because we know we are that good. So, I mean, I know that many of us are similar, and when we start focusing on what we have historically not been allowed to do, we sometimes lose track of what we can do, and also what we have done, what has been accomplished. And this what is that term? Anticipatory compliance. Take ourselves out of the competition sometimes, and it's important not to. It's important to speak up and stand tall and build a community of folks who will cheer us on as we move forward.
Yeah, and along that same line too, I follow this young man on Instagram, and one thing he says, he feels when people don't want him there. He feels when people don't want him to speak, and he said that just compels me to keep going. Because I don't show up for them, I show up for me. It enhances my need for you to hear my story. So we have to keep showing up.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much.
Okay, Casey. And you guys are welcome to come off mute if you have a question. Yeah, Casey is next there.
Well, just a couple of things. I so appreciate the focus you put on how there's this giant group and the disaggregation that's needed. And do you have any advice or sort of call to action or such to how that we can be respectful and try to dig into all of that without trying to lump everyone together? And I don't really know how to make the words, but can you just talk a little bit more about that and what we can do to help in that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it is the acknowledgement that we are not all one people, but we also share this one country. Those two things, if you can hold both those things in your mind as you move forward through the world, it makes all the difference. So having the basics of anti-racist behavior, right? Like, because we can't know all of the diversity of humanity that the US has such a richness of, and we can't possibly know that. So I think making a practice of leading with the humility that I don't know, and I'm not going to know, and I hope I don't make too many mistakes, but please let me know if I do, and move forward with the assumption that if you're in America, you're American. I think that's a it's not so much a call to action where you're making phone calls for people, but it's just a shift in the mind, where you, regardless of where the circumstances, the history that you come from, if you are in America, you live in here, you're part of the fabric of this society, and you're a person like any other person.
Right.
I don't know
And
if that was at all helpful.
no, that's what I meant. I didn't mean a call to action like an organization. I just meant like a way to approach, just what you addressed.
Yeah. I will tell you what I have been doing for myself because, just another person just like you. I have a Netflix. I make a point of trying to, just to build my own cultural comfort. I go on Netflix and I watch Crazy Rich Asians and I watch the Spanish language shows and I make sure that I watch Turkish. Oh my goodness, you have to, if you haven't seen any Turkish shows, you really have to. So interesting. I mean, I think it expands our minds, what we see, the scenery they show, we have preconceived notions that we don't know we have. And how do you know what you don't know you don't know? So, that's been my tool. I listen to music from around the world and I watch a lot of Netflix shows from around the world. And it changes, it changes my world. It shows me respect as Crystal just said earlier, the language, who's using the language, what does marginalizing mean, for example? There's I was reading about architecture and how, because I'm a clean energy organizer in my job, I was reading about how architecture impacts energy consumption in a home and how those mud houses, mud homes and mud huts and thatch roofs that we have been like colonized to believe to be inferior are so efficient, both in energy use and keeping coolness and healthier. So now I am reading about, and there's a terminology for it that I'm not remembering, but it's indigenous architecture, which is amazing. So my mind is exploding with all this fabulous new knowledge. So I encourage you to participate in those kinds of, global perspective work.
Flexen, I see you wiggling with the question. Take it away.
I wasn't sure what the protocol was, so thank you for noticing my iggling. I really appreciate what Casey brought up and that you've been talking about. And it seems like there's this natural tension, or maybe it's unnatural, I don't know, about kind of what I would call lumping and splitting, lumping people together and splitting them apart. And so I feel like that's a big lesson that I've learned from what you were sharing with us is, how, whether that's local versus national, or whether that's, like ethnicity versus a broader term. And I think it really, I learned a lot from Isabel Wilkerson's book Caste, and like, so what are the underlying things under racism? And so I think that kind of othering and disempowerment and those kinds of things that I always looked at as results of racism, in my mind, it seems like they're kind of the underpinnings of racism. I mean, I might be wrong, but when I think about, because even when we talk about another way of kind of, is it lumped together, split, if you go, well, it's important to, show up and be there for yourself, to be empowered, right? But not when it's the dominant culture that is constantly doing that, doing it just for themselves and not really paying attention to, disempowering others by doing that. So it's almost like one size doesn't fit all when it comes to this, and when it comes to identity, I mean, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but that's the thing that keeps happening for me, because I mean, it just seems like it seems like you don't fully understand the importance of all the different levels of identity, and like whether and so when you have to, well, I don't know if you have to, people need to lump together to become more. Your example of Chavez and Filipino or Mexican and Filipino farm workers is a fabulous one, right? But yet then there's also the splitting that goes on. So anyway, that was just my observation.
I think that what Flaxen brought up is really important. And I think it's our next step. And that is identity. If we identify as anything but human, okay, with any aspect of our diversity, we will then buy into the fallacy of us against them. I mean, that's normally what happens. But if we literally ascend to the one thing that we all share, and it's irrefutable, right? That we're all human, then we can take a look at the diversity that distinguishes us, and we can appreciate everything about it. You know, as you know, this, you know, the presentation was going on, I was thinking, you know, like she's bringing up some of the greatest cultures. Okay. I mean, think about it. In Africa, that's where humanity started. Okay. It has a special significance when you think about all of the contributions that Asia has given us. Okay. And you can just go on, but they shouldn't be that us against them. Okay. It should just be, okay, this person did this, this culture did this. But the only way that we're going to really move forward is to drop that us against them and then be us against harm. And the only way we can be us is the one thing that we share, which is our humanity. And once we get to that balance point, then we can appreciate everything. Skin color doesn't mean anything except our diversity, the beauty of the palette of the creator, okay, if you believe that way. And I think that we're at this significant point where there's so much us against them in our world right now, but it's so ridiculous because there's a sameness that connects us that just supersedes everything. And I think that what we have to do is, that's our message. We have to just unite. And then every time we see an incident of harm, okay, in any aspect against any aspect of our diversity, then we unite as humans against harm in any way, shape, or form. So, you know, I mean, I think it was the anniversary of George Floyd. Am I right about that? And what happened is that, you know, that did get a ripple, but then we fell away from it. Why? Because what happens is that we still see, you know, okay, well, you know, that happens to be an African-American thing, or whatever. It's a human thing. It is a dignity thing. And when you can see the dignity of every culture, which there is, okay, then it's just that which makes us unique. And I think that's the message that we have to really put out, you know, with, with the subtitle of that, different isn't bad. It's just different. And that if harm happens, and that was that unity part that I think Casey brought up, okay, we have to unite and say, no, this is not allowed. And it's not us against them or whatever, okay? It is us trying to make us move forward, okay? But the only way we're going to move forward is to realize our unity, and then to take a look at every harmful thing that happens to any culture, any aspect of our diversity, and say, unacceptable. I don't know how we do that, okay, but I know that there has to be that start, okay, or else we're just going to be talking and talking and talking again. But there has to be action, especially now, because I mean, I'm approaching 70 this year, okay, and it's like I have never seen the polarization and divisiveness, and I lived through the 60s, and in the 60s, at least there was truth. You know what I mean? There wasn't, just, the total fallacy that's going on now. But I think we have to raise it up to that level. And then the unity that comes from that, I do think is exponential. And that's how we attain anything. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. It's going to take some work, but I would love to see it happen. Would love to see it happen. So I think it's going to be another conversation. You and I need to talk, and maybe Casey and our team would need to talk too, because you said this last time and I was really, really inspired, and I feel like I'm even more inspired now. We need to be the messengers, but it's going to take us planning that to make it take place. Okay. So let's talk, Charles, when we have more time. Bob, I think take it away.
I enjoyed that comment from Charles and perspective, and it made me think about my own experience watching children grow. Especially I'm in the middle of baby grandchildren, and it's really fascinating to watch how they develop their own personality, coming from the same parents, but it's like just incredible how different they are, and how much I absolutely enjoy seeing the differences, really more than the common characteristics of these children as they develop. And I think at a broader level, that's the issue that Charles is talking about, where we appreciate the fact that they're so human, and yet they're so different, and that's the fascinating part of them, is they're so different. If everybody was alike, it'd be a really boring, weird place. And when you add culture, language, all those sort of racial colors, all those things make us different. And it's a shame that we can't see how enjoyable that is to have that variation and that kind of diversity that is really fascinating if we can step back and realize we're all humans, and especially when I think about seeing this globe floating around in the universe with all these people on it that are not enjoying what a phenomenal experience we're in the middle of. We're attacking people, and all that stuff is just such a sad reality, I think. And I'm approaching 80, and I have a perspective on life right now that's different than it used to be, and I don't know how to share with that perspective really well, but it's a very interesting stage for me, frankly.
Thank you, Bob. Really appreciate that. John, and then Jyoti.
Me?
Mhm.
Yeah, I was listening, and I was going to say my one word, and wouldn't have said as many or as fully as Seth. Is human. Again, we are human, and so, but within that humanity, we have different roots, but we're still human, and that has to drive the conversation, which I think is what Seth was saying. I was at a workshop yesterday, and it was a discussion between, I guess they were Episcopal clergy, white man, African-American woman. And the thing that the woman brought up, and I think, and I resonate with me, is that the man had said, we're accompanying immigrants. Is this accompaniment of immigrants across the Episcopalian community is so, it creates unity, it's helped unity. And she stopped him, says, I agree it helps create unity, but unity should not be the goal. Justice needs to be the first and foremost measure of what we do. If we see injustice, we need to call it out and create justice. And from justice, if we act justly, unity should follow. but the message shouldn't be unity first. It should be justice first with unity following. So I thought that was a comment that resonated with me. And again, it's like justice across all humanity should real in unity. And so I want to share that. And then the last thing I again just have to casually read from a business entrepreneur that I order from a lot in Michigan called Zingerman's. And he writes a lot about his business and how it applies to life. And within this newsletter he talked about we need to have citizen society as opposed to the subject society, which was top-down authoritarian king, queen, and everybody else just waited for the king, queen to do stuff, and versus the consumer society that we've evolved to an industrial revolution of just, well, we're going to consume goods to try to get our betterment, try to get like the rich people, try to get better. And that's failing. And it says, well, it looks like we're drifting back to people wanting to be into the subject authoritarian society. He says, however, within our businesses, we've taken an approach that we call the citizen approach, which everybody, it's not my business or her business, his business, it's our business, and we are all empowered. And they're trying to say that maybe is that the third way for us humans as a citizen ownership of the way forward. So all these things in my head are coming as we talk today, again, with the idea of empowerment embedded in justice. I guess that's what I would say.
That's powerful, John. Thank you. Okay. Jyoti, I'm mispronouncing your name. Sorry about that.
No worries. I give everybody a year.
Thank you.
I just wanted to, what you're saying, what you've all been saying actually resonates. The idea, especially of the disaggregation versus aggregation. We aggregate when it builds power. We disaggregate it when the aggregation hides our power or our needs or dehumanizes us in some way. I think that's the core thing. We know we need to step back when we are losing the humanity of the people we're interacting with in the numbers. That's when we need to disaggregate the data. And I wanted to also say, first of all, I'm like so happy. This discussion has been very uplifting. It's undoing the effect of the studying of this history. It's great. And I wanted to say that part of the coming together, the togetherness, the humanity of it, requires for us that we are able to call in the people we love when they are othering somebody. So essentially, we are required to show up as allies. We don't often, too many of us, because we're human and we don't want to upset people. We fail a lot of times because allyship comes with a cost. There's a social cost attached to it. At the very least, your best friend, you say, hey, you know what, that kind of sounded like maybe not so cool. They're going to be mad at you. I don't know how mad they're going to be. It depends on your relationship. It's going to cost you something. And it's in those moments when we have to remember the humanity, the larger, that we cannot push any one of the larger out of it. We have to show up to pull everybody into it, into the belonging together. So thank you so much for this conversation. This has been very rejuvenating.
Thank you for being here and for sharing. Okay, Flexen, you have a comment. Take it away.
Just real quick, that's beautiful, Jyoti. That is so beautiful. That's what I was trying to get to about this tension of aggregation and disaggregation, individual. I always think of it as, we always go, yes, but, yes, but this. And I have really tried to go, yes, and, because there's times, it's almost, I'm wondering if it's just human nature that we do that split lump, split lump, split lump kind of thing. And it just gets really ugly when it's just, like you say, with the data, lump, 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 because then you don't know what you're dealing with. Or just split, 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 which is you can always find another. And everybody, the closest person to you, you find another in them somehow.
Thank you. So, Jyoti, would you have the last word, please? And then I'll stop the recording. Just whatever you want to say.
Well, Asian Americans today make up 7% of the population of the United States, and almost half of us are born outside of the country. That's quite a large number of people who are bringing culture and heritage and history with them, and a large number of people who are American by birth, who are from various parts of the world.
Thank you.